So it's 1999. I remember clearly my freshman year in college. And I had just walked into my grandmother's home, and the house was completely sealed, meaning all the windows were closed and the AC was off. It was a little stuffy, I remember. And Jerry Springer was on, so that's what I was going to watch. So I turned on the TV, and as I'm watching, I hear this noise come from the kitchen. It sounds like ding-a-ding, ding-a-ding. So I put it on mute, and I listen for a little bit, and then I just ignore it, and I start watching TV again, and then I hear it again. Ding-a-ding. So I get up, and I go and I look in the kitchen, because that's where the sound came from, and I'm looking around to see what could have made that noise. And I look in the sink, and my grandmother had two little porcelain angels sitting on the windowsill above the sink. Somehow they ended up one in each sink, and they were standing up facing each other. So I look at them, and I'm like, how did that happen? So I'm looking for a draft, the window, the AC, which is, right above, actually at an angle. So if it was on, it would have done that, but no, it was off. And the window is sealed, and I'm like, that's strange. So I get them and I put them back up where they're supposed to be, and I go back to watching TV. Well, as I'm watching TV again, I hear it again. Tick-a-tick, tick-a-tick. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no way that it's the little angel, right? I mean, I know I just placed them up there. So I go and I look, and sure enough, they're there, sitting in the sink, facing each other. So I pick them up, wedge them into a little plant that my grandmother had there, like with little vines, and just stuffed it in there. And I laughed to myself, and I said, try moving them now. This is a mistake, I guess. So I go back to watching TV, and there was this mug, glass coffee mug, and it was, this is the counter, and it was over here when I wedged those little angels. Well, somehow, as I'm watching TV, it ended up on the floor smashed. So I kind of took that like, okay, yeah, so I left. I promptly left. A couple weeks later, my grandmother had fallen or something. I can't remember the situation, but she ended up in the hospital, and my mother asked me if I could stay over at her house just to watch over it while she's away. And I said yeah. So after work, I get home, and I'm watching TV and stuff. And when I'm ready to go to bed, I decide to sleep in her room because her room was the only one with a bed in it. There's other rooms in the house, but they were just mainly being used as storage. So I'm sleeping in her room, and it's 3 in the morning at this point. I'm out cold, and I feel something shaking. Now, the shake came like from my leg, from my foot area. So when I woke up, I just passed it off as one of those muscle spasms or something. So I ignored it, and I went back to bed. Well, somewhere in between being asleep and being awake, it happened again, but this time it was further up on my thigh, and it was more of a shake/push kind of feeling. So I wake up and I'm thinking, wait, that felt too real. There's no way that was a muscle spasm or night shake or whatever. So I start thinking, I'm like, oh, I know what happened. My aunt told my cousin the same thing, and he's here somewhere. So I get up and I start looking through the house, and I go to every room, and walking into the restroom and stuff, and seeing that I can see something. And, no, there's nothing. And all the doors are locked and stuff. So I go back and I lie down, and I'm thinking, and as I'm lying there thinking about this, with my eyes closed, it happens again, and this time I'm fully awake. But this time it happened more around my hip area. It was more of a push, and you could clearly feel the bed depress as somebody was, like if somebody were to push you while you're lying down. That freaked me out. Okay, but my family knows that this kind of stuff happens at my grandmother's house pretty often. So I got up and I'm like, okay, I get it. You don't want me to sleep here. So I got up and I went to the kitchen. I mean to the living room, and I slept in on the couch, slept really late. So that was that moment. A couple years later, maybe, I was being dropped off at home from work. And I'm sitting with my buddy, and he's facing the house, I'm facing him. And I had already noticed a kitten that was playing in the driveway. It was a small cat. And he asked me, what is that? I'm like, oh, that's a kitten. And he's like, yeah, but what is it playing with? So I look over and I see this kitten and it's playing with something. It's sitting on his haunches and it's pawing, like, you know, they would with a ball of yarn or something. But the interesting thing about it was that underneath his paws was this creature, this thing that was doing this. Like, stop it, like, leave me alone. So I tell him to roll the window down, so he rolls the window down. This, I think you guys know where I'm going with this. This little person was about this big. And I'm not even kidding you, about this tall. And when I turned back to look, are you seeing this? And my friend was glued to whatever this was. And when I turned back, this thing had already turned to face us, and it was looking at us. Of course, I couldn't see any definition in his face, but you could just tell that it had turned its face. And we're looking at this thing, and it just starts walking away on 2 feet, 2 legs. And I could feel my friend tensing up, and he's kind of like, dude, what is that? And as it got to the gate, the fence, walking away on 2 feet, it's a hurricane gate, so it's got holes in it. So he put one leg into one of the holes, kind of shimmied his body in, pulled his other leg through, and then kept walking. I go, dude, you saw that, right? And he's like, yeah, man, get out. So I get out of the car, and he leaves. And my next instinct is to try and catch it. So I started looking for it, and I sneak into the gate, and you can kind of hear that it had already crossed into the neighbor's yard, because it was fall and there was a ton of leaves on the ground, and you could hear that it was walking away on the leaves. The next morning, I told my grandmother about it, and I said that I had seen a duende, which is a gnome, and she's like, oh yeah, they're around here, I've seen them too. So it just kind of took me aback, and I'm like, what, really? What are you talking about, right? And she said that my aunt had once caught one too, and she had kept it in a jar and stuff, and my aunt swears that she did. So, I mean, I believe it. I saw one. Years later, recently, like maybe a few months ago, I told my cousin about it, and she was like, yeah, well, I believe it, and I'm like, really? And she's like, well, when we were kids, when I would come home, I'd come to your house to play with your toys, you would tell me that the little people had come to your house, and they had taken your toys, and that they hadn't returned them, and that I was upset because they had my favorite toy, and that basically she couldn't play with my toy that day because the little people had borrowed it, which kind of reminds me of the movie The Borrowers. I mean, I didn't remember any of this. I mean, this is being told to me by my cousin, and so that I just found that real. Before my wedding, I had just moved into my grandma's house because I was trying to save money for the wedding, and of course my ex-wife was staying with me at the time, and this one night, we had just finished cleaning the room. We were both going to bed. We were tired, and we're lying there, and she's facing the opposite direction, and the TV's at the foot of the bed. And I see something fly across the screen and hit the floor. What I imagined it to be was like a towel or a shirt being thrown from her end of the bed over to my end of the bed, but at the foot of the bed. So my first reaction is to ask her, "What did you throw?" Well, she turns around. She says, "Well, I heard that. I heard that, but what was it?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I thought you threw something." She's like, "No." So I immediately get up, turn on the light, and I start looking around the room to see what it could have been. And there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing on the floor. And the bed is made, and there's nothing that could have been a shirt or, boxers, underwear, nothing. Like, I know what I saw. Something clearly passed in front of the screen, and it hit the floor, and I could not find what it was. A couple nights later, I work graveyard, so I was going to work, and it was about 11:30 at night, and about 12:15, my ex-wife calls me, and she's like, "You need to get back here." I'm like, "Why?" She's like, "I'm scared. There's something in the room with me." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, I guess deep down I already knew what she was trying to say. Like, she was finally experiencing some of the stuff that goes on around here. So I'm like, "Okay, I'll be there in a few minutes." So I get there, and sure enough, the TV's on, the computer's on, the lights are on, and she's, half asleep. So I get there, and I sit with her for a little while, and she eventually falls asleep. Well, I turn off the TV and the computer and stuff, and I left. Well, 30 minutes later, she calls back. She's like, "Why did you leave?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm working. Like, I can't be there. Like, I'm sorry, but I have stuff to do." And she's like, "Well," I'm like, "What happened?" Well, something ran into the bed, and then I felt somebody lay in the bed with me. And I'm like, really? And she's like, "Yes, Michael." Like, I'm like, "What did it feel like?" Like, "Well, I can't explain it other than something ran into the bed, and then you could feel like as if somebody were laying next to me, like the impressions of somebody lying down." So inside myself, I'm thinking, God, this can't be happening, right? So I go back home, and as I'm walking into the house, I'm speaking to myself. I'm like, "You better not ever touch her, scare her, or do anything to her." Because I was mad that how can this entity or this person, this thing, be messing around with my wife, right? So that's where I left it, and I walked inside, and she eventually fell asleep, and I left again. But she never really ever had any more instances of terror, I guess, because she was really scared, like petrified almost. I don't even know how she was able to sleep with how scared she was, to be honest. But that's that story.